Hi guys, Brett here from Hearns Hobbies, and today I would like to take a look at continuing the service and repairs on the all-new HR1 Buggy. So I don't know if you watched the other episode, but I have in fact, we'll have a look on the top here. I have got it, the chassis. I've removed the front clip, the front suspension module, and the rear suspension module. Now in the previous episode I did in fact, while I had the center diff out, service and refill the diff, and I did put 7-way oil. So before I go any further, I'm actually going to relabel this, and then in today's episode I'm going to service and repair the rear clip. I mean, not really there's anything to repair, but I will service it and clean it and rebuild the rear diff for you. Okay, so let's, first thing is to continue is to get this center diff done. So I'm going to get this out of the way. Put this on my special bench. We can get the front out of the way. We don't need that, but I do need to clean off this 8K, this 8 writing, because I did in fact use the all new 9 steps 7000 in there. And if I don't do it now, I will forget. And it's just a reference for if I feel the car needing a heavier or lighter diff. As far as the oil is concerned, it's a matter of knowing what was in there to begin with. And given that I don't see a lot of track time lately, it's not like I'll be changing it in a week or two. It's more likely to be in 6 months or so, the amount of use that I actually get to do. Here we go. So that was just a little bit of thinners on there, and then I'll take my paint pen. In this scenario it is a Molotow pen, and I'll just write 7 on there. I can write any code you want really. Here we go. Go ahead and write 7 on there, and a Roman numeral over here, and over here I'll just write number 7, like so. There we go. You don't have to use a Molotow marker, but I do because it's really hard wearing actually. So there we go. Center diff is done. I'm going to put that to the side and then get to work, as I promised, on the rear clip or the rear suspension module. So it's all come out in one unit. Now what I like to do is take off the arms as one part and just work on the diff. So to do that I'm going to need a couple of 5.5 mils, 2 mil and a 2.5 mil driver. So I usually work from the arms out. In this case I'm going to take off the camber link, and in this scenario I'm actually going to leave the screw in that hole so I in fact know where it came from. And that's really handy if you're not doing repairs in the same day, like I often aren't, where you might do half a repair then come back like a few days later or a week later. It's handy to know exactly where your adjustment points come from to make sure your car does go, your buggy does go back the same way. Like so. I'm gonna take the sway bar out. Oh, I need a 1.5 mil for that. It's a nice little screw. Really well designed. I'll get a little bit closer here so you can see I've taken off the camber link. Now I did check the dog bones before I disassembled for any bends, but now's the time where you will look for drive shaft wear, excessive wear on the pins, which there is absolutely none, which is a really good sign. So if they were in fact getting thin, it would be the time to replace them before they fail and break on track. Take the sway bar mount off. Oh, it is in fact, I did not expect that. That's okay. I'm going to actually leave that there. I'm just going to take it off from the sway bar right here, like so. And these are really beautifully made sway bars on the HR1. Laser etch so you can see exactly what side they are. If I get in really tight with the zoom, you will be able to see that it is marked with 2.0. So that's available, I believe, in 1.8, 2.0, 2.2, 2.4, 2.6 is pretty typical of sway bar sizes. So I've got that off now. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the arms off. So for that I'm going to loosen the, commonly referred to as a D bracket, because that goes all the way through the gearbox housings and holds it together. So these screws have got to come all the way out. Again, some people like to use cordless drills and stuff. I don't so much. So these are like a 3.5 mil by 42 or 40 mil thread. Quite a big beefy screw here, holding the D plate onto the gearbox and holding the lower part of the gearbox cases together. Here we go. Now what I like to do with these, and you can hear straight away that I do in fact have binding. Can you hear that? There's a little bit of squeaking coming from there. And I'm spinning the hinge pin. Now what I'm doing here is feeling for tight spots and looking for movement in the arm across the pivot point to indicate any sort of bend or imperfection in the, and of course I've gone and grabbed the wrong tool, haven't I? Got some pliers here. It's a 5.5 mil. Let's see what I can do. Sorry, bear with me guys, I'll be right back. Okay guys, I am back, sorry about that. Okay, so I did in fact have the wrong tool. So you need 2 and 5.5 mil drivers, if I was better organised. Can you hear that squeaking? And when this is all serviced up, that should all be gone. And the squeaking that you hear, that is usually just dirt and dust and clay working its way into the pivot pin. And that's what I like. These hinge pins actually do up on a shoulder, so they do up nice and firm. Go ahead here and take these out. Now something that is worth to remember is in fact, before we go any further, is our pills. Now you can see here that we've got dots on the pills, and these are the inserts for the suspension block. So on the C block, which is the front of the rear, we have got 2 holes up, and then on the rear we've got 1 hole up. Now what that's doing is changing 2 things. First one is roll center and the second one is anti-squat. Now I'm not going to get into those adjustments right now because we're just doing service and repairs, but I am going to take these hinge pins out. And there we go. The D block comes away from the gearbox, as easy as that, with the arms still attached. So we can service that as a unit by itself. So we'll go ahead here, get the pill out, and it is 1 hole up on the rear. So it's really nice just to do parts at a time. Here we go, and look at the hinge pin. A big, beautiful hinge pin there. Really tough. I'm not saying that you can't bend them, but they are really, really tough. And it's at this point here where you could in fact polish it up, stick it in a Dremel or the cordless drill with some metal polish like Autosol and polish it up. But what I'm looking for is any pitting, wear or damage, and being a HR1, there absolutely is none. So that is really nice and usable. I can clean the pill. Now this is probably where the dirt has got into, causing that squeaking noise. And these are a beautiful Teflon, really sort of like, it's a really robust plastic polymer, but it's also really low friction. So there needs to be obviously an amount of strength there, but they can't be brittle and snap, and they can't be too soft because they'll bend and go out of alignment. So the HR1 has a beautiful balance there. Got the suspension arm washer to keep everything all nice and bind free. And now, like I said, I'm just going to work on one side at a time. So I've got the arm unit here and the rear hub. So I'm going to take the rear hub off as well. You can see here how free that is. There's no slop and movement. I do, however, need a Phillips head screwdriver. Got my suspension arm now. Now this is a beautiful design of the HR1. It is a hinge pin retaining screw. So it keeps the hinge pin nice and light, being unsprung weight. And also keeps it really nice and strong. Look at that nice solid bar. And again, I'm looking for any pitting and marks. Doesn't have it. You can see that it does have a little bit of discoloration where some of the hardening has worn away. And it's at this time now where you could in fact stick it in, like the other hinge pin, stick it in the Dremel or the cordless drill and give it a polish. But in this case, I'm just going to give it a wipe over. I don't really want to introduce any lubricant. You never tend to oil or lubricate your hinge pins in your car, especially on race day, because what that does, it actually attracts dirt and dust, and that sticks to it, and that does in fact turn to what is essentially like a valve grinding paste or an abrasive paste that does wear both your plastics and your hinge pins all at the same time. So keep it clean, keep it dry, and you can double check it by putting it on your pit board and giving it a roll. And you can see here that it's got no bend. If it was like a banana or not rolling nice and flat, you would know that it does have a bend in it. And I'm actually really surprised that it doesn't. Now when the arm is at this point, I will generally tend to start cleaning. But in this scenario, I'm actually going to take the drive shaft apart. And to do that, I'm going to need some fairly heavy duty tools, like these 9-step pliers, and that pin here should be quite tight, and it does get Loctited as well, this grub screw. Really great design feature and keeps it all nice and serviceable, is having a grub screw retaining on your hex drive pin. Super lightweight aluminium hard anodized hex on the HR1, keeping a rotating mass down and all your, oh, here we go. And now I can see my stub axle or outdrive, whatever you want to call it. Now the HR1 at the rear does have a floating dog bone arrangement, so it doesn't have a universal or a CV, but it's really dependable, reliable and efficient. And because you've only got one arc of movement up and down, you really have to do something drastically wrong or have a major failure to in fact lose drive or in fact lose your drive shaft. Now one thing I'm going to do here is check for any notches and wear on the outdrive, and I'm doing it, you can see on the overhead, and I'm spinning it against each other and sliding it in and out, and by doing that I'll be able to tell if there is in fact any notches or wear on the outdrive. And if there was, you can in fact get a small file in there and clean it up. And if it's too sloppy and wear, like this one here's got just about zero slop and wear in there. If it is sloppy and got like, you know, a 1/16 of a rotation of slop, then you probably want to think about replacing both your dog bone and your outdrive, your stub axle. Really nice. Now the main reason I did in fact take that out was so I could clean and check the bearings. And again, I'm going to be cleaning it just with a little bit of blue tack, because there should be no other dirt and grease on there, and I don't want to scrub it into the bearing. So by using compressed air or simple green or WD-40 now would in fact be washing the dirt into the bearing. So by using the blue tack or the sticky putty, I'm just taking the surface dirt off and out of the way. like so. And then I'll just be getting a rag and wiping the part over for any dirt and debris. And I've got the turnbuckle still attached. Again, just giving it a really nice little clean off. And I'll get my little brush here, my little Aramax cleaning brush, and just give it all a big nice dust off. Shouldn't need any more than that. Now I will check the bearing, because if the bearing in fact is gritty or damaged or seized or got excess clearance and run out in it, I would in fact go, this is a time when I would replace it. So I do that by putting the stub axle back in, and by spinning it I can feel that there's no dirt and grit in there whatsoever. Now I'm not going to re-grease it or re-oil it or anything like that. It's perfectly nice and smooth. There's no need for any further action. I will, however, clean the hex and the pin and put it back together. Just dummy fit everything up beforehand, making sure that it all fits nice. You shouldn't be having to take a hammer or chisel to your car, your buggy, any time that you service or repair it. And if you pay attention when you're cleaning it and servicing it, there should be no need. And I'm just checking out a clearance. Nothing needs to be shimmed. It's really nice. You do want a little bit of free play in there, just because as it gets hot, and it will in fact get hot, you need to allow for the expansion in the metal. So got a little bit of Loctite here. Just going to put a drop on my workbench, like so, on my pit mat. And then I'm going to put my grub screw into it, like so. And I'm going to put this drive pin back in. Now the reason I do it now is in fact to make sure that I don't forget to do it later on. And the 9 steps wheel wrench is really handy for this, because A, it keeps the pin centralized, and B, it's hollow, so you can just drive your hex driver through there, your 2.5 mil in this case, and tighten up that pin nice and firm. Now I did put Loctite, so it doesn't need to be absolutely wrenched on. All you're doing is retaining the pin in there. Go ahead and I'll put my wheel nut on so I know where it is later on. There we go. Look at that. That is one hub serviced and repaired. I can go ahead now and clean off the arm for which it sits on. And again, I'm just going to take to it with my brush. Nothing critical here. Now while you are cleaning your arms and everything, it does pay dividends to really pay attention with what's going on, because you can in fact pick up any problems, any wear points right about now. And I'm just going to take my, and the reason it's given it a little rub is to in fact have a look at the friction, the surface area, and make sure that there's no burrs on there, because as the car is under load and the suspension is, you sort of want it. I'm only using a very fine grit, so 800 grit, and that is just polishing up the surface area where the two plastics are going to have a contact patch. So you can see here that there's not much play. You're always going to have a tiny bit of play in an 8 scale, and in fact you can shim that out, but you do not want to risk binding it. So I'll do that there, and I'll also do it on the inner hinge pin, just where it seats on the pill, on the back of the pill there, just to make sure that there's no burrs on the surface area. There we go, on the contact patch. And like I said, I'm not going to introduce any cleaning agents. Just going to go ahead and offer the hinge pin now should just go straight in, and it should all assemble really nicely, like so. put the retaining screw in there, and that hinge pin is not going to go anywhere. Like so. Double check that. Beautiful. We've got no bad signs of play, got no squeak, no rattle. We are looking good. Can go ahead now though and put the hinge pin through and just give it a little rub just to make sure that there's nothing stuck or gritting in there and it's moving perfectly free, which is really nice. And not having introduced any lubricant in there, I know that nothing's going to stick in there. Fantastic. So that is one side done. I will in fact put that pill back in this side, and it is one hole facing up. And I can in fact get to work on the other side now. Like so. I will in fact, actually while I'm here, I'm going to give this suspension block a good clean off just to make sure that it does all go back. And for that I am going to use a tiny bit of WD-40. It is an anodized part. And I've got my favorite toothbrush here. Just going to give it a scrub, and that's more just to make sure everything's going to go back nice and smooth, because it is, and also surface the metal a little bit. Give it a scrub. And again, that's going to make sure that the pills are sitting inside the suspension block nice and square. There's no debris stuck behind them. And biggest drawback is obviously just making a little bit of a mess, but clean it all up. Where you don't want WD-40 or any lubricant is in your pivot pins, because that will attract dirt and dust straight away. Whereas here I'm just using it as a surface protectant on this alloy block. And here I can check it for wear. Let me zoom in. So I can see here that does in fact have a little bit of wear, but it does have plenty of meat left on it. The HR1, they do offer different degrees of D block. That's the rear suspension block. This one here, 3 degrees, 3.0. That refers to the toe. So the inclination of the inner hinge pin, rear to forward, giving the car a good amount of grip. Okay, go ahead here. 1 dot up on the D block. And they should be nice and firm to go in. They shouldn't have to hit them in or anything. You want them to sit in nice and firm. And I'll go ahead and I'll put the second one in there. Now I'm a bit of a stickler. I keep left for left and right for right. And you'll notice that when these do get worn or deformed, that's a simple little service item, is a set of pills for your car. So once you put a new set of pills in, you get a really nice feel from the Buggy. And definitely before a big race meeting or something like that would be the time when I would go ahead and do that. And this one here is the right arm. Go ahead now and put this one sort of sub-assembly, I suppose you call it. Put on my friction washer. There we go. That is the right one. Now we can get to work on the left one. Rolling it around again, checking for any bend or warping, which there is none. Really good sign. Take the stub axle off. Using my 9 steps wheel wrench. No chance of that falling off, which is really nice. Should all just slide apart. Okay guys, just getting stuck into it now. I feel that I've given you a really good rundown as I've gone along, so I'm just motoring into it. Beautiful, nice and smooth. I was just reattaching the rubber shield that came off from the sticky putty. Checking the ball ends for any wear and tear. Making sure everything's nice and straight. Bit of 800. Again, just polishing up the surface. Trying not to remove too much material, but just making sure I've got a nice surface here for my 2 suspension components to pivot off each other. Clean up the hex and the pin and the stub axle, the outdrive assembly. Again, just checking for any wear with a dog bone. Nice smooth operation, not getting caught in any notches. There we go. A little bit of Loctite on the grub screw, and in that goes as well. Wheel nut wrench to hold the pin in. No need to do it crazy tight. Just want to make sure that you are in fact doing it up on the pin. It isn't, which leads me to the fact that there's a bit of debris in the stub axle. That's a handy little tip. So sometimes just have to feel your way through these things. That should have it now. There we go. And I'll just double check that in the pin. Yep, nice and tight. Beautiful. Put the wheel nut on. Then I can get to my suspension arm. Give it a quick dust off, looking for any damage or cracks or anything like that, any deformation, any big hits, and this buggy's had a few. Just polishing up the face. Giving it a nice smooth surface to run off the peel and the hub. Like I said, just a very fine sanding stick, 800's fine. The aim not to really remove material, but just to polish it up to make sure that we've got silky smooth suspension operation. And you can see I've just dummy fitted the hinge pin. Just double checking, make sure it's nice and smooth, which it is. Nice and smooth in the hub. Can go ahead and complete the assembly. Put my screw back in and we are in business. A little bit tedious doing these buggies, but you don't have to go to this level. This is purely just a demonstration. And some people may even go to a higher level, and that's fine too. Like I said, you can take the next step for me would be polishing the hinge pins and potentially re-shimming the hubs and stuff, making sure that it does have free play but no slop. Go ahead and put that on, and that is the rear arm assembly done. There should be, when we put that together now, there should be no squeaks, rattles or anything. Rear suspension, that can go to the side. Okay, now we can get to the juicy part. Still got the gearbox right here. Now you can take as much of this or as little as this apart as you want, but what I am going to do, the first step, is in fact seal up the gearbox. So see here, we've got the gearbox that's open. I'm just going to put some blue tack like so, and that's going to cover up any holes. So now I can brush it off without in fact brushing dirt and debris into the gearbox housing. Last thing I want to do is create any more dirt in there than what's currently in there. Want the gear mesh to be nice and smooth. It's not going to turn over now obviously because I've got it jammed up with blue tack. Give my suspension pin, get the toothbrush in there just on the alloy part. Like so. There should be no need for a complete strip of this lot unless it's really, really dirty. And you can keep your buggy as clean or as dirty as you want, I suppose, at the end of the day. Okay. You can see here I've got all the dirt off of the bench. Again, with the not wanting to introduce any dirt and debris into the gear mesh, because once I get this grease out, it's going to start to get all sticky and mucky. It's going to pick up anything that's on the bench. So now to get to the gearbox, it's a couple of 2.5mm screws on the rear diff cover, and out it comes. And this is exactly the same technique that you would use for the front end. There's a little bit more in the front end, I suppose, checking the kingpins and the caster blocks. We've got an extra movement there in the steering, but apart from that, it's exactly the same process. Go ahead here. There we go. And so at this point here, you want to remember the orientation of your diff. So it can go in left and right effectively, And I've seen a lot of people in fact install it in the wrong way, so when you put it in, the rear wheels will be trying to spin a different way to the front. So just so you know that it's on the left, and keep in mind your shims. So we've got shims here. Now I checked it in my last video about the free play, but we'll check it on assembly anyway. So this one I know on the crown side, a little bit of burr on the outdrive here, just making these shims a little bit. It's such a tight tolerance on this HR1 buggy, it's really good. Now I'm just going to have to clean that a little bit before that comes off anywhere. Get these shims back into situ and give it a little bit of, here we go. Get the shims back into situ, and I'm just going to give it a really light rub. The Scotch Brite would do the same thing. There you go. And these ones now should just slide right off. And then just get the slightest, smallest burr just from dirt and debris. I don't really want to take any material off if I can help it. Just want to clean up that burr there. And that's perfectly natural from your dog bone or your universal rubbing in your outdrive. And these electric buggies have got so much torque. So I've got our shims off, and you can see the mess from the copper. Now this is a rear diff, and you can see straight away that last time I built this one I did in fact use 3K oil. Well, it's got 3 written on it, so let's hope that I've been true to my word, and we'll go ahead, we'll rebuild this and flush this and go again. Again, checking for bearings, giving it an initial clean down. Cleaning in the gearbox case, looking for any signs of trouble as far as gear mesh is concerned, and you'll see it by flecks of metal. So we'll have a nice close look in here at the tooth profile. I can see that it's looking beautiful. There's no uneven wear, there's no polish marks, there's no grit and middle flakes. The tooth is looking really nice, and I'm really happy to reuse that. And again, I can check the bearing here. It's beautifully nice and smooth. It's not crunchy at all or gritty. And I can also check the free play, moving backwards and forwards through the shaft. It does have a tiny bit, but you want that little bit of float there to allow for the expansion when it all gets hot. Beautiful, really happy with that. Now, final mesh will be checked on assembly. But while I've got it on zoom, we can see here we've got 1, 2, 3 shims, and you just want to make sure that there's no dirt on these shims between the 2 shims, because that can in fact change your gear mesh quite substantially if you have dirt build up between your shims. So make sure your shims are clean, put them to the side, make sure they're nice and true and flat. And that's why I like using this silicon style pit mat, because you can actually polish your components like the old eraser, I suppose. A bit of rubber, it does actually polish up the metal components ever so slightly, just to give us that beautiful nice machine look with no debris. Put that there. So you can write it down, but I know that it's got 3 shims in the whole rear gearbox, and they're all on the crown side. And I know the Buggy itself was beautiful and smooth. So final clean in the gearbox was, again, I don't like using any spray or lubricant. I will dig out some of the old grease and debris, wipe it onto a rag. And then I'll go ahead and push in my blue tack. Just like so. See, it's taking it all out of the box, cleaning up the teeth, and we will in fact put fresh grease in there when we reassemble it. And it's really important to also clean out where the bearings go and the shims, because you want to make sure that your gearbox casing, your diff casing housing is pulling up correctly and giving you the right clearance, giving you the right gear mesh. So if you have dirt and debris in your bearing retainers, and that is along the edge here and here, you can in fact misalign and change the mesh of your gearbox with dirt and debris. There we go. Beautiful heavy duty gearbox. Really strong. Not going to give you any problems there as long as you take care of it. Okay, now I'm going to pull out a little bit now. Put that to the side. I like to clean it as I go to make sure that when I reassemble, I'm not, like I said, handling dirty stuff as much as I can. Front gearbox casing, again, with the bearing area, is the most critical part to me, to make sure that the two cases are marrying up. Beautiful. Put that to the side. Then we can get started on the ever critical rear diff. Now it's more than evident last time I did this, like I said, I did 3K, got 3 written here and 3 on the side. Very typical of me. I am in fact going to go a heavier fluid. It is the middle of summer here in Australia. Do have outdoor temperatures usually in the 30s, and after a 10-minute race you'll find that the diff's quite a bit warmer, you know, up towards 60 degrees even. So I just want to make sure that my oil is in fact not overheating. So I'm going to go for a 5K diff oil in the rear diff on this one. But let's get this rear diff apart and show you what's up. And now when I pull this rear diff apart, it will also give me a good indication of exactly how the tuning has been. So if it's overheated, it will be really burnt and a really dark color. Now I'm expecting it to be gray because it was the first rebuild of this car from brand new, the oil I put in there. So it will sort of, as the gears polish up, it will discolor and go gray. But if it is black and horrible, then we know that it definitely at some point overheated the fluid in the diff. So we'll crack this off. Now some people, I said it before, like to use power tools, but it's really not that hard. Especially because when I do build these cars, even rebuild it, I will generally use a tap if the threads are tight, especially something critical like this diff housing, because you want to feel when you're actually tightening it up. And if you have tight threads, you can't actually feel when you're tightening it up. Not only that, but you also damage your screws and tools just from the constant torque applied. So here we go. Now what have we got? Hopefully the gasket's in good condition, can reuse that. I would have used assembly lube on it. Just pull it apart ever so gently. It's going to have a little bit of stiction there. Oh, look at that. That is absolutely perfect. That is what I wanted to see. I'm just going to zoom in here, guys. So like I said, we do in fact have a discoloration. So the fluid for our diffs what am I going to be putting in? I'm going to be putting 5,000 in. So this is the 9 steps 5,000. You can see how beautiful and clear it is when it is new. So the diff, although it's been hot, it hasn't been severely overheated or abused. The diff has in fact gone a grey colour, but have a look when I put it onto the rag and move it away. Yeah, see, it's still relatively clear. That is exactly what I wanted to see. That is a really good indication that we've actually had good diff fluid in there through the cooler months. Like I said, this car, in my previous video, this car has done about 3 meetings in between these diffs being rebuilt. So 3 meetings on a diff is a long time. That's probably about 3 hours of track use, I would say. Take the bearing off, take the pin out. Now where's my gizmo? I'm going to use a gizmo here on the O-ring like in my other video for the center diff. I don't like to use any metal tools if I can help it. And if the gasket's going to stay there, it can stay there. It's beautiful. There's no dirt and debris in there. There's no discoloration. There's no metal filings. Really, really happy with that. You can see that the bearing does have a little bit of dirt on it. That was obviously the shield facing out. Again, just going to hit it with the blue tack, and all that dirt and grime will come away without pushing it into the bearing. Like so, just flip it over a few times. Now, I don't know if you saw that on camera, but I actually just rubbed the race of the bearing onto the rubber mat. And that does in fact clear it up for any dirt and debris to make sure that it goes back in the gearbox housing really nice. Like so. And at this point now I can actually check again the blue tack really coming to its own when cleaning and working on 8 scale buggies. Checking the out drive for any damage. Now they do have the recess, the relief machined in there, which is really nice. That lets us put some grease on there. Again, even on the crown wheel. Just use the blue tack, it will take it all. All your dirt and grime will be sucked into the blue tack and come off of your parts that you're using. It'll push it out the way, and we're not scrubbing and introducing any more dirt, moving it around. Now when I've got it like this, it'll also give us the perfect opportunity to check the gear for any wear. And I'm just making sure that the back of the gear is really clear. There's been no debris inside the gearbox housing itself because there's no scratches or marks on the gear set. But let's get in macro close and check out the teeth. And you can have a look there, it is beautiful. There is no damage. It's the tiniest bit of polishing, but these hardened steel gears in the HR1 are super quality. Really happy with that. We've got our gasket on there in one piece, which is really nice. I'm going to leave that there. There's no need to peel that off and disturb that. Again, it'll have a nice layer of grease in there. I'm going to clean. You can see there's a little bit of dirt and debris inside here, inside the O-ring, and that's perfectly fine. It's going to make sure that that's out of the way before we go and freshen it up. And it's as simple as, again, that just pushing the blue tack in and having a look at how nice it is. And it should be exactly like that. Beautiful. Really, really happy with that. Couldn't be better. As far as 8 scale diff goes, that's as perfect as you would want it. I'm just going to go ahead here and lap the screw heads into the casing, making sure that there's no dirt and debris in there, which there isn't. the screws haven't been loose, because you'll have a knock. You'll know that it's been loose because there'll be a leaking diff for a start. Definitely not. Really happy. Check the bearing. Beautiful smooth. That's not going anywhere. That's gonna go again. Time to get this part of it rebuilt. So I'm just using the kitchen cloth. And I like to use kitchen cloth because it's, well, A, it's disposable, and B, you can really see if there's any debris left behind. And your parts won't go away. So again, I've got two greases that I use for this part of the assembly. We've got the lithium grease, which I'm going to use on my outdrive, and I'm just going to fill that groove up in the outdrive with grease, because that runs straight into the middle case there. And then I'm going to put that there nice and clean. I'm going to get my rubber grease, safe for all rubber, and do the O-ring. Just like so, nice liberal coating, and that can go straight into the housing, like so. Then I get my 7mm wheel socket that I've got here, put my bearing on the crown wheel, and offer that up, making sure there's no dirt in your tool, pressing your bearing down, seating it, and putting your pin in. Handy little 9-steps pliers here. Beautiful. And I can put this part to the side, having serviced and repaired. There we go. Put that to the side, and then we can get started on the differential assembly in proper. So now they don't hold a lot of fluid, but still enough to make a terrible mess everywhere. So I'm just going to bring this over to the middle of the shot. Again, I don't like to use a lot of metal tools in there if I can help. You shouldn't need anything serious. That's the top pin, so it's going to go on the top of the paper. Digging that out. I've got a old oil thing that I can put here. Just let that drain for a minute while I clean up these gears. All the while just paying a little bit of attention, making sure that there's no wear on the gears. I can tell by the color of the oil that there absolutely will not be. This thing has been meshing beautifully, working really nicely, so it's not going to lead to any problems whatsoever. In fact, I dare say that it would hardly need a change. Most people would see that and not go any further. But for the sake of the tutorial video, we will rebuild it and go up a notch in the oil. Get that cleaned off. And again, just using the blue tack to push all the debris out of the way. Now I will get one of these gears on macro and show you. So have a look here. Now they're beautifully polished. There's no pitting, there's no wear. That is beautifully run in and completely serviceable to go again. Nice and rounded tooth profile. A beautiful example of how you want your diff to look. A dream rebuild actually, because you're not really replacing any parts, just servicing it with the knowledge of knowing that it's going to go, you know, another season of racing. Here we go. There's one diff set. one bevel set, another bevel set, putting the washers back on. We'll put that one right there, then we'll get the lower diff casing apart. Get that gear out. Sometimes they can be a little bit tricky. And the diff casings on these ones are just ever so slightly different, in that there is a 2mm plug here to help get the pin out. And you just have to be careful of this. You don't actually do this one up tight. I mean, yes, it's firm, but it doesn't actually do up against anything, because if you do that grub screw too tight, you can in fact tighten up and mess your gear mesh inside your diff assembly. Here we go. Getting that pin out, drive, bearing. Take the opportunity now to get the O-ring out. Again, using my plastic gizmo. There we go. Okay, going to let that drain off now while I get to a little bit of hand cleaning. Again, just with the out drive, looking for any damage or wear where it runs through the gearbox casing. You can have a look on zoom now. See, it's nice and polished, and there's that groove I was talking about, and that's what's nice to fill up with the lithium grease. Keep it all nice and running smooth, because that is just a metal to metal connection. Just runs exactly like that. So you can check for slop and play. When your housings are worn, they can in fact leak because of just the run out and the slop, but that is beautiful. That's barely worn at all, probably because I greased it last time that I built it. Having a look at that housing, you can see here the shiny spot where I have in fact prepped it up and CA'd it. So I mean, that is molded into the plastic, but I have in fact glued that up, and that's just an extra step I would take against the chance of any leak. And it's definitely working, because there's no leaks coming out of this gearbox whatsoever. At this point now, before I get stuck into any more cleaning, I will in fact put blue tack, surprise surprise, inside the gearbox housing, give it a little bit of a wipe off, and then I will hit it. I need to zoom out a little bit here. Then I will actually just surface the face, just to more double check, because I know I would have done it last time, just on the 800 side of your 9 steps sanding stick, just a little bit, not applying great pressure or amount of force, just a few passes as I'm rotating it. Now when I turn that over, I will be able to see that it is all perfectly matte and not glossy, and that means that I do in fact have a really good surface area. So if it was in fact did have a raised ridge, or there was parts that weren't being hit by the abrasive, I would know that that part would need further machining, so be it, to get a surface. But that is going to give me a really good sealing and surface area. This diff will not leak. Okay, now the reason I put the blue tack in there was to avoid any of that plastic material in fact going into the casing. And I will continue to give this casing a little bit of a wipe over, making sure that it is nice and clean for reassembly. Using a microfiber cloth, a lint-free cloth is really good. Don't use any harsh chemicals on the plastics, and making sure, having a good look into the O-ring seal, making sure that there's no dirt and debris, and I'll double check that by putting some blue tack in there and cleaning out the O-ring recess. Now I can see that it's got a fair bit of silicone oil in this blue tack, and it's just a matter of just massaging it through. Therapeutic. Here you go, look at that, as good as new. Okay, just going to press it into the housing. can see here it actually got a little bit of dirt from the gearbox through the outdrive boss, which is really good. Bit of grease out of there. And I usually push it from the inside out so it doesn't actually flush the dirt in, if that makes sense. So we're pushing it out, not pushing it in. There we go. Look at that, beautiful, nice and clean. A little bit of oil residue in there is fine because the quality of the oil was really nice anyway, so I don't have a big concern. You could, if you had a weeping diff at this point, change your gaskets and O-rings, but this one was perfect, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse everything. And I think by servicing and maintaining your cars, they actually not only perform better, that goes without a doubt, but they actually last longer and cost less to run, because you're servicing and maintaining parts to get longer life out of them, not just repairing them when they're broken. So it depends how you like to do your racing. So I've got the O-ring grease on there, and I've got the lithium grease on the, filling out that groove in the outdrive to make sure that we've got, that's all the grease we need for the moment. Oops. One crucial step was my bearing. And again, just a matter of the old blue tack. And again, you can service the bearings, but generally once they're grumbly or they're at all, I suppose, suspect, it's the time to replace them. You don't want to risk wrecking your beautiful gearbox or DNFing a race because of a failed, you know, $2 or $3 bearing. So the fact that these are all beautiful and nice gives me the confidence to put them back together. There's no rumbling. Go ahead and offer that up exactly the same way. 7 driver over the O-ring, get it seated into the recess. Go ahead and put my pin in the side. Very repetitive, especially when you've got 3 diffs to do. So I'm just going to do this one, and then you've got a really good basis of understanding. So we've did the center diff, and then this one, and you'll treat the front and the rear gearbox exactly the same, but I just want to show you the mesh and in fact the diff rebuild, and let you guys get to doing the front one all by yourselves. Okay, then we go ahead and put our grub screw in. Now I'll be the first to admit that I have in fact forgotten this grub screw on more than one occasion. And it's, I mean, you soon figure it out because your diff oil leaks out. And I mean, I've never got to the point where it's gone into the buggy, but yeah, on the bench. So I'm just making sure the grub screw is nice and straight going in. Now, like I said, it doesn't do up against anything and it won't fly out, but I'm just going to get my hobby knife because I want to do it up until it's proud with the back of the housing. So I can just feel it. Just running the back of the knife along, making sure that the grub screw is not sticking out, because if it is sticking out, that can act on the back of the bevel. There we go, perfect. And then that is this side of the diff done. At this point here, I will drop the gear back in, making sure that it's all nice and clean. Now, if the diff oil was completely ruined and it was yucky, or it had in fact effectively evaporated or been run dry, then we'd be in a different scenario where we would probably be replacing housings and everything. This is the rear diff, and I'm going to step it up with 5,000. I've got the grub screw in there, I've got the outdrive in, and I'm going to put a little bit of oil in every step of the way. I'm going to build it like a sandwich, just stack it up. Start by putting it down the cross pins, getting it running down there. Getting a little bit under the first gear. Getting it in, getting it located on the pin, should just drop down like so. Just spinning it, making sure that it's all located, everything's nice and smooth, like so. Biggest thing when doing the diffs, as I tried to drill into you guys when I did the center diff is in fact not to get it in your casing screws. If it goes into your casing screws, you're in a world of hurt. Just gonna use my gizmo here to assemble this. My hands being all lubed up and slippery, not making it the easiest. Putting the cross pin relief to the top. Giving it a little turn while holding it, just making sure that it's all nice and seated, which it has. I'm going to go ahead and put a bit more 5000 9 steps fluid in it. Should really have some positive drive out of the corners now. Going to go ahead, put in this one. Again, making sure that the relief in the cross pin is facing each other, pushing it down with my plastic tool. And then just giving it a little spin, making sure that it's all meshing, and going ahead now and filling up the remainder of oil. And I'm just going to fill it to the top of the bevels. Making sure that none go in my screws. Go ahead and I'm going to drop the top gear in. Now a little point here is I just line it up, if I can, with the cross pins in the gearbox, and that helps me guide the pin and the mounts and everything together. Just that final step, making sure that it all goes together as good as it can. A little bit more oil in the back of this gear. Now if you're using a really thick, if you're doing a GT and using 300,000 or something, you probably want to let it sit for a couple of hours or even overnight, because the oil does not naturally flow. I've seen people heat it up and stuff, but I don't. There's no necessary to give it an unnecessary heat cycle. Like so. So everything is together. You can see here it's just about full with fluid. Up to the very top, not quite. I'd say it's probably 95% full, and that's because I want to allow for a little bit of the volume come out of the diff. And there will be, I have seen people use shock pumps and that sort of stuff, vacuum to get any air bubbles out of the diff, but for the given application in the HR1, I don't think it's necessary. Now, last thing I'm going to do is actually put a little smear of rubber grease over the gasket area, and that's just going to make sure that I can in fact get the gasket off next time I use it and reuse it. And it also creates a nice seal. So I haven't packed it on, just the thinnest of smears, and that's going to help it seal and also help me reuse the gasket. So I can see here I've got the cross pin lined up, I've got it in the center of its assembly. I can flip it over and know that it should just all line up. Got the gasket in there. Can give it a little bit of a wiggle. Always a little bit harder to do on camera than you think. Then I can go ahead and offer the screws up. Now it's very important that you just get the screws started one by one, because you want to make sure A, that you're in the screw hole, and B, that you are in fact sealing it up and avoiding any diff oil going in there. In case you've overfilled it or it's bleeding out, it will in fact avoid any diff oil going into the mounting holes of the crown wheel. Because if you do that, like I said, you'll get a hydraulic lock and you will strip the threads before everything takes up. I'm just rotating it, getting it all nice and lined up. Now it might not happen first time. Just feel a little click. Okay, let's see what we can do. Now we're just going to pull it down. It's just not sitting very even. I'm going to take it off and try again. Just didn't line up as nice as I wanted to. Now I haven't leaked any fluid out. I suspect that my pin is moved in the top out drive, but that's fine. Sometimes you just need a bit of patience, and that's why I don't like to use power tools, because you do in fact lose a lot of control and feel. Yep, so go ahead here, everything nicely seated, can offer it up. There we go, that one should be the shot. It's fighting me all the way, this diff. Here we go. Gear in. Center pin lined up. And you can use a holder or something. If you're doing the multiple diffs at once, I like to use like most shock stands have got it in. And generally when I'm doing diffs, I will do all of them at once, because it's such a sort of repetitive job. You might as well just do it all at once. It's just the same amount to do one diff as it is just about to do 3. And you can have it all laid out nice. Nice little production run. It's getting those screws started. Getting it all. Then it's a matter of just tightening them up nice and evenly across the face of the crown wheel. Not actually really tightening it, just I suppose facing them, mating the screws. It's not over happy with this one. Going to take it off and do it again. Sometimes you just need to make sure that it's right. And again, I haven't forced anything, haven't done anything up. I just not happy at 95%. I really want it to be as simple as, if you watch the center diff one, it just went together so easy. And it really is nice when they do that, because you've got absolute confidence that everything is seated and meshed well. And looking at the fluids and everything in this diff, there's no reason that this differential unit shouldn't. It's just me trying to do it awkwardly on camera, I would say. It's at this point here that just want to make sure that there's no diff oil bleeding out if you have overfilled it and going into your screw holes. That will require you to clean them out. Take this gear off again. Now that everything's slippery, it's getting hard. Just going to line this gear up again, and what I can see has happened is my pin has moved from the center point. Like I said, I've got my oil in there. There's nothing that's bled out because I haven't overfilled it. People tend to, I find, overfill their diffs rather than underfill them. You know, but what you're doing when you are filling a diff is in fact getting the gears to paddle through oil. So if you overfill it, it can in fact cause a hydraulic lock and an inconsistent feeling in your differential. Of course, when it's all overheated or leaked out, then it's a different scenario. But that's why they only recommend you fill up to, once it's fully complete, like 80%. And you can weigh it. Some people do weigh their diffs, especially when it's a single diff like in a 1/10 on-road car. Again, I'm just facing it up again. And it's good that we had the chance to show you guys. You don't always get it right first time, but if you don't rush, look at that. That's better. So I did take a couple of goes, just working my way around the gear, doing it up all nice and evenly. All very similar torque settings. And if you do it up with a power tool, that's where you lose that sort of control, that feeling. Okay, that took a little bit longer than I thought, but nonetheless, it is done. All right, the last step that I suppose I've got to do for you guys, we'll have a look at the gear mesh, but we're just gonna, oh, that is buttery smooth. Really nice bearings. We know the bearings are good, everything's sealed. We've got grease on the gasket, we'll be able to use that again. Final torque settings. One, two, three. There we go. Final wipe down. Last step before I go any further is in fact to clean off my redundant wiping oil setting, which was 3K. So I've got a little bit of thinners here on my Molotow pen. Cleaning it off, and that will allow me to write the fresh digits on there. Because if you don't write on the differential unit yourself and you don't keep records, like I don't, and you come to service the car in a couple months, you can't remember. Or in fact, you're at the track and go, oh, I wouldn't mind going up a little bit in oil or down a little bit in oil. You don't know what was in there. So simple little writing, and it won't go anywhere. So now we've got 5, we've got 5, and over on this side I'll use the Roman numerals, 5. There we go. Can put that to the side now. Last step in this, I promise guys, was in fact the gear mesh. Now we know that we had the gearbox is ready. I'm going to put the 3 washers on the crown side of the diff. Wash the seating really nice. Now you just want to make sure that they go into their housing correctly and they're sitting nice, and you should be able to give them a little spin with your finger, making sure that everything's nice and true. Now the first thing you want to is make sure that you are meshed. Make sure that you've got your crown wheel in correctly. Now remember I said it was on the left side, which it is. And we're going to offer up the rear of the casing. And the only way to do again, making sure that it goes together really nice, what we have to do here is do it up the casing. That is the only way to check your gear mesh. Now the reason I pay such attention to this when I take it apart is to know if I do in fact have to reset the gear mesh upon assembly. Because you don't want to be finding out now, if you can, that you have to reset your assembly, because you really have to take the D block off. And because I like to take the D block off with the arms in this situation, because the D block on this car does tension up the bottom screws. But this will give an indication. So first one is the free play in the pinion. And if you can see in there, we've got about 1 thou. Just a little bit of a knock there. I've got a little bit of run out free play float in the pinion itself. There's probably about 1 thou there, and then in the mesh itself, in the gearbox case, left to right, you want a little bit to make sure that your gearbox isn't too tight. And this one seems to be ever so slightly, it might have a tight spot in it, like here. That is ever so slightly on the tight side. So what I'm going to do is in fact take a shim out, and that is fine, and that is probably from a little bit of wear, I would say a little bit of movement in the gearbox housing. But the last thing you want is an over tight gear mesh, because once it heats up it goes tighter, it doesn't actually go looser. Now I did think that the gear mesh was really good when I took it apart, but now that it's all reseated, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one out from the crown wheel, like so. We've got 3, and I'm going to take that out to induce a little bit more of free play in the gearbox housing, and that's probably because the housing has just taken up a little bit more slack now. It's got a few heat cycles into it, the plastic, and it's actually squished a bit. So taking one shim out and put it back in, and we will double check it. So I've got a little bit of free play in the gearbox housing now, which is what I want, ever so slightly, and we have in fact got another thou of clearance in the gear mesh, which is going to be perfect. That is going to be beautiful when that does up. Fantastic. So we did in fact have to reset the gear mesh a little bit. That's no problem. So now I'm going to, let's put this back together with the D blocks on. Here we go, this one. Whoops. That one like that. It only needs a little bit of slop. Just enough to get it all lined up. Now I don't like hitting hinge pins if I can help it. Got the pills in the right way. I'm going to put these nuts on, and that is the rear clip done. So you can see it's quite an extensive rebuild, the rear clip with the gearbox, with the diff rebuild, but it's definitely worth it. It's going to make the car consistent, it's going to make the car reliable, and it's going to make sure that we get the maximum value out of our investment as far as servicing. So do the hinge pin up, that will do up to a shoulder, and see I can still spin that nicely, but it is really tight. We've got it all super free. Look at that, that wasn't that free before. Can go ahead and install my dog bones, giving them a quick tidy up. Like so. Put in my turnbuckle, and I will be double checking the gear mesh, and I will be applying some grease. Now usually I wouldn't apply grease until it goes back in the chassis, because the grease in fact does attract stuff, but I want to show you guys how I put grease onto my gears. Not everybody does. This case I'm going to use the lithium grease, the white grease. And you can see why it's handy that I left the camber link or the roll center adjustment in situ. There we go, torquing that up. Other dog bone, oh, here it is, Brett. And the reason I'm leaving the sway bar until last is because that is actually going to require a little bit of adjustment. I'll show you what I mean. But I like to get the rear clip all together and have the sway bar go on last. And in hindsight, I mean, it did get pulled off first. So I'm really glad that we have diagnosed that. And look at that, we are moving much better now. I can go ahead now and put these two whopping big screws in. These 3.5 by 42 mils. And these will do up really nicely into the housing. And I've not used a single power tool in sight. Everything's nice and clean. Freshly rebuilt diffs. We are cooking. This HR1's going to be awesome. And you see now the gear mesh. Now that we've pulled up the diff casing, this is when we have to check it. And yes, you can just take the hinge pins out. But I like to do everything under the correct torque if I can. Beautiful. Make sure these. There we go. Look at that. That is beautiful. Nice and still. Got a little bit of free play in there. We are looking good. That is exactly what I wanted to see in that casing. Great news. Beautiful. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to put on the sway bar as the last thing. And the reason I'm going to do that last is because I want to do it up just to the end of the sway bar. And I just want to feel that with my finger. To make sure that it's all central and that the arms are lying flat on the bench. And then because it actually runs through the gearbox housing and other grub screws, I'm just going to double check those ones to make sure that I do have the right amount of free play and adjustment without binding. So here we go. And I just do that by keeping the arms level and moving it ever so slightly. And I can see by the run out here that I do in fact have two loose over there, and that's all it takes. It takes like an eighth of a turn to get the right setting. Left and right nice and even, because people tend to do them up too tight. And there we go. There is the rear of it done. It's moving nice and free. There's no squeaking there. And we are on fire. That is fantastic. Well, I am Brett from Hearns Hobbies, and thanks for watching me service, maintain and rebuild the rear suspension unit and the rear diff and gearbox settings on the HR1. Thanks for watching.